So tonight's topic is Hashgacha about Hashgacha. It's a little different from what I usually talk about in these shiurim because it's much more personal, but it's also it's about kashrus, but it's also a huge amount of observation. Just what I really do is tell over stories and events in which the uh, the seeing Hashem's hand was such a obvious sign. It was so fascinating to me. You know, we know that Hashem runs everything in our lives, and that everything that we know, there are no coincidences. But sometimes it's more obvious than others. So when it deals with kashrus, which we call hashgacha, and we also talk about Hashem's supervision as hashgacha, so it's hashgacha about hashgacha, Hashem's supervision about kashrus supervision. But sometimes it's just unbelievable. There's some unbelievable instances that I've had. So I'm going to start with a personal story uh, that goes back a number of years ago in my life. We were, my wife and I, married. I was in Kollel for a few years. We had no children the first couple of years we were married. My wife was teaching in Beis Yaakov. We were in Baltimore at the time. She was teaching in Beis Yaakov of Baltimore. The Can't say that the pay scale there was fantastic, but we survived on it. That's what we lived on for the most part. And then at one point, my daughter was going to be born. I felt it was appropriate that my wife should be shifting from full-time teaching to half-time teaching so that she could spend time with our daughter, or who would be a daughter at the time. At that time, we didn't know that yet. And which meant that I had needed to bring in a little more parnasa for the family, more livelihood. This was, we were in the summer months. It was during the Ben Azmanim period when the yeshiva was not open, the kollel was not open. Rabbi Heinemann from the Vadakashas of Baltimore, famous Rabbi Heinemann, Moshe Heinemann. I was in the Bis Medrash in the yeshiva in the summer, and Rabbi Heinemann came over to me. It was on a Wednesday. It was on a Thursday, and he came over to me and he asked me if I was interested in doing some work as a mashgiach in a meatpacking plant that they had under their hechsher on the next day, on Friday. Now, the background to the story was as follows. They had started a shechita a few months before. The reason was that there had been a major meatpacking house, kosher meatpacking house in Philadelphia that serviced most of the East Coast. That packing house had closed up shop. There was a need for meat, kosher meat, supervised prop meat. They were able to arrange with a small, I would say small, meatpacking plant. Not tiny. I've seen really tiny places, but this was a small place. It was in the Baltimore area, not far, very easily drive from the city, from the neighborhood. They had arranged a shechita there, and at that time they were shechting there only 3 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And the sheikhtim that they were using were all people who lived in Philadelphia, had been working at the Schlachthaus, the meatpacking plant, the abattoir in Philadelphia. So Friday was a day that they were not bringing them in because, there was no need. Okay. And they had a mashgiach working at the meatpacking plant who was there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And Friday and Shabbos, Friday and Shabbos, sounds like funny to say that, yeah. He was working as a mashgiach in a nursing home. And nursing homes that are kosher supervised obviously need mashgiachim too. So he was there. So he had 2 jobs as mashgiach. Friday, he couldn't work in the meatpacking plant, following the complications of the story. So they needed somebody for this one Friday because one of the sheikhtim were going to be in Baltimore for Shabbos, and therefore were available to do shechita on Friday. So Rabbi Hyman asked me if I was interested. Just, it was supposed to be a one-time thing. They needed someone for that one Friday. And I needed a little extra money anyway, and it was during vacation time. And it was Fridays, which we know that yeshivas and Fridays are allergic to one another. So it was not a bad bad situation for the one time. So I said yes. We actually went out to my house. I changed clothes into clothes appropriate to a meat packing plant. As you can well imagine, you don't come to working to a job in a meat packing plant wearing a tuxedo. You wear, the workiest, the most work looking of work clothes that you can possibly have. Your clothes are going to be quite soaked when you're finished working, and it's not going to be with water. So um, went there that Friday, and I worked there, and the next Friday again, and the shaykhit, as the system worked out, ended up shechting every Friday, and it kind of like just happened that oh, for the next time every Friday, I would go into the meatpacking plant with the shaykhit. Now I had smich already at the time, but in virtually all yeshivas today, standard shechita has nothing to do with standard smicha. Excuse me, it has nothing to do with checking and being involved in involvement in shechita. Very, very few rabbanim are involved in shechita. It's a specialty item. People who go into it usually are sheikhtim, small sprinkling of rabbanim study for shechita. Very, very few. It's certainly not standard in almost virtually, I don't know, almost anywhere. Almost anywhere. There are one or two yeshivas still where it's standard. I can think of two, but it's very not standard for people in regular getting smicha include this extensive study involved in shechita. And I hadn't done any of that. I had not studied any of shechita at the time. Uh, I was going into the meatpacking plant. I have always as an interest in this type of work. So while I was going in, anyway, I started reading up on Shechita, and I learned the vast knowledge that's necessary for Shechita. Everything but learning how to shecht, which just was hard for me to do. But everything else, how to check the animals properly. There's what's called inside checking, outside checking. There's all the halachas involved. Went through it very, very extensively. And by the over this period of time, I got along very well with the shaykhid. I saw how a shaykhid works. Most important of everything is I learned how a meat packing plant, which is a very unique type of factory, let's call it that way. And you really have to get a feel for how one is supposed to operate. If you don't get a sense of a feel for how one's operating, even if you know the halachic background, and you go to check, you're not in any position to check what you're looking for because you don't really know the practical ends of what might be going wrong. Is it being operated too quickly for the jobs to be done correctly? Is it shorthanded? In terms of the staff of the shechtim, they're expected to be doing more work than is realistic to expect them to do. Are there other problems that can happen? Just to tell you the type of an example that I saw years later was where I was at a shechita in which the labeling of the tags that you put on the kosher meat was totally chaotic. Totally chaotic. It just was not properly being controlled. Um, those are the types of things that can go wrong. There are numerous types of things that can go wrong, most of which you understand from being involved in the field, doing the work, and seeing how it works. So, the first part of the story is that for the next 2 years, which was my last 2 years in Colo, ended up going every Friday. I went in for this to the meatpacking plant with the shaykhit. I went in with him. I went back, came home with him. I learned the skills of the trade. I learned how to check knives for shechita knives. I learned how to sharpen a shechita knife. I learned all the things, all the skills that are necessary. I learned, and fine. It was all virtually accidental because I had really no intention to ever be in shechita at all. Certainly not. I had no goals in life to be a shochet or to work in a place of shechita. Certainly were not goals of mine. So here's the interesting part, okay? First part of the coincidence, okay? The first part of the coincidence is as follows. The I was going in for 2 years, one day a week, with the shaykhid because that's they had started that day, that Friday, because they needed more meat, and there was the shaykhs were available, and the regular mashgiach wasn't there. So I was the literally the bottom guy on the totem pole working in the Beis Hashchita. I was the mashgiach, but they needed him too. Fine. 2 years later, after I had already made the decision that I was going to be leaving Kollel and began looking for positions, and I went to interviews in several different places, and had been taken a position in Buffalo, and was planning to move to Buffalo. So the people in the Shochet knew what my plans were, and Rabbi Heinemann already knew what my plans were. But the fellow who owned the meatpacking plant, whom I'm doubtful knew me any more than as one of the junior rabbis who was on the staff. I'm sure he had no idea anything more than that, who I was. Certainly not any idea of my name, and certainly never had a conversation. Literally the last Friday I was there working, which, we were already talking about arrangements for what would happen after I was gone, who find a sub, a new person to do the job. The guy who owned the butcher, the shop, the packing plant, named Butch was his name. So Butch went over to Rabbi Abramson, who was the head shochet, and he said, "Well, we actually are getting more kosher meat right now than we really are selling. So I think starting next week, we're not going to eat Friday shechita anymore. No, Friday kosher, as he called it. I don't think he knows the word shechita either. No more Friday kosher for as of next week, just the other days of the week." And you realize that they had started doing the shechita on Fridays, okay, and I was asked if I was interested, and I had just decided that I was interested in looking for some side work. Worked for exactly 2 years, okay, and basically the last day that I was there, Butch decided that he didn't need any more Friday shechita. So it worked out virtually to the day, exactly to the day, not very exactly to the day that they started the Friday shechita and the end of the Friday shechita, which was very nice because I learned all these skills about shechita, and I was the side livelihood was very useful also. So that's very good to show you Hashgacha on how it helped the Kaganovs. But it really doesn't tell you anything about Hashgacha. Okay, for that, you need to understand what it was that was going to Buffalo. Buffalo's a small, very lovely group of people, an incredibly lovely group of people, a small group of people that were in Israel and Buffalo. And my predecessor, Rabbi Kalman Winter, had made it a very high priority of his tenure there. One of his high priorities had been to build an understanding that you should need a hechsher, that you shouldn't eat from places where the owner says it's kosher and there's no hechsher. There were a lot of interesting problems, but the community had not very little under hechsher. So you can't really have a Jewish community. Or there were like several butcher shops in the community that were called kosher. None of them were the owner of the shop was really at an observance level that you would really entrust him fully with kashrus. None of them had a hechsher. There was a thing called New York State kosher law at the time, which they were all responsible to, but that itself didn't really uh, demonstrate a very high level of kosher if it was kept at all. The newspapers were filled with violations from these butcher shops, particularly one of them was constantly being cited for violations. Eventually, by the way, the New York State law was overturned because of violation of separation of church and state. It was considered at the time, the heading under which it was ruled was that it was under the Department of Agriculture and Markets, and it was under a truth in advertising. In other words, if you claim to be a kosher operation, you have to be kosher. But the legislation under which it had been put said that it has to be kosher according to Orthodox Jewish law. And the state courts eventually overturned that by saying that you can't have a state body enforcing something that says it's Orthodox Jewish law. Okay, that is a state enforcing religious practice. Okay, and that's illegal in the United States. You cannot have infringement. States and religions cannot be cannot government and religion cannot mix into one another's events. Uh, just as a curiosity aside, is New Jersey subsequent to this time passed a different type of kosher law, which has been maintained, and their law says the following: you can have any operation you want and call it kosher. But what you must do is you must make it available both to the state and clearly advertised. In other words, from the street outside the store in which you're advertising that your products are kosher, you have to have a sign up which says by what definition you're calling yourself kosher. And the sign has very, very specific information. It says as follows: you have to say what the name of the operation is. Do you have outside supervision, or are you the owner is guaranteeing kosher and that's all? Um, a series of other such questions that are required to be on that instruction thing. So a guy could sell pork chops and put on the outside of it that his pork chops are kosher, and there would not be a violation of state law. But he would have to write there that he himself is guaranteeing that his pork chops are kosher, and whatever his definition of kosher is for that purpose. That's not, the state can't enforce him that he can't say that his pork chops are kosher, but they can enforce that he is clearly saying what he is selling. So you have restaurants or bakeries or whatever it might be, and they have this clear sign marked up there. And to make a long story short, got to Buffalo, knew this was going to happen, and there had been an attempt to create by lay people to create a Vatikashus. But of course, the Vatikashus had no rabbi and no enforcement, and basically it was the ultimate paper organization with no existence until I would get to Buffalo. And now the question would be, could we get this Vatikashus operating? Could we get it off the ground? The town with city had no bakeries with any hechsher at all. We had no bakeries that even claimed to be kosher in the city. There were bakeries that were selling to people who were buying there because they were assuming the bakeries were kosher, but the bakeries weren't claiming to be kosher. There was no caterers that were Shomer Shabbos. There were three caterers who claimed to be kosher, but none of them were Shomer Shabbos, and none of them had any hechsher. The butcher shops, this was the situation in town. You get the feel from what it was like. Anyway, the Baruch Hashem, the Vatikasha, the first year and a half or so, we were really like bang our heads against the wall trying to get the Vatikashas going. It was uphill very beginning, very, very uphill. But eventually it did take off. Eventually, Baruch Hashem, when I left Buffalo 4 years later, we had everything that you need for a basic local Vatikashas. We had butcher shops, caterers, um, bakery. Today, they have all of the above. As a matter of fact, today, that particular Vatikashas uh, has been um, has been really very well known. As a matter of fact, they take care of the kashrus for a lot of other things in the area, including they oversee the kashrus for several of the national organizations in that area, and they've taken over the local Vada kashrus for purposes in Rochester to a heavy extent. I believe there's a couple of restaurants in Rochester today that have Buffalo's Vada kashrus extra. So it's really become a very well run organization. But this was square one. So what does this have to do with Hashgacha about Hashgacha? The background is as follows. After we were beginning to try to get things going here, so then we had a butcher shop. First was one, later was two butcher shops who were interested in our hechsher. And so, okay, I had to know a lot of things that I did know already about how to run the kashrus in a butcher shop, how to do the kosher butchering, which I had a skill I had picked up at one point. So I knew that. That I know. I learned it. I went to a lot of places to see, to double check. I knew that skill. But the other problem was where is the meat coming from? I mean, that's the last stage is the kosher butchering and the koshering. You have a whole stage before that of who's taking care of the shrita. Now, based on my smicha, based on my training in yeshiva, etc., I wouldn't have known a thing about shrita. Not a thing other than, what it says in the Mishnah, a little bit of Gemara. That's all I would have known about it. Anything for any. And here, suddenly I was literally, I would say, globetrotting. I was traveling a lengthy area of northeastern United States, from the Buffalo areas, both by car and by plane, not private planes, no, flying into towns to look at different Batei Shchita, to find shchitas that were acceptable that we could use. So here I was traveling, and eventually I ended up having other people asking me, my experiences about different places and travel, and asked me to take a look at their operations. But the interesting thing was that I only got that experience because of this very strange hashgacha. Put back the scene together, put all the pieces together. Decided that I needed some little extra parnasa. Otherwise, I had this come up 2 weeks before, I would have been not interested at all. Why should I start working in a meatpacking plant on Fridays? I was in Colo. My job was to learn, not to be working in meatpacking facilities. Rabbi Heinemann came to me on the day. It was within a day that we had decided that I'm going to have to start getting some more parnasa, a little bit of something, whatever it is. We don't know what it is. Probably had figured that I'd probably do some tutoring. The most logical thing is to look around for some tutoring jobs to make some extra money. And Rabbi Heinemann came to me and said, would you like to go to the Beis HaShchita tomorrow? Or would you be interested in working in the Beis HaShchita just one day? It was only a 1 day, week by week thing. It was 1 day. Okay. So I did that one time, 2 times, etc. Ended up working there probably about 100 times because it was 1 day a week for 2 years. Learning, getting along really, really well with the shaychet, and ended up realizing that the easiest way for me to get to and from, even though our schedule was a little different, was to go with the shaychet. Very amenable fellow who I've had time to learn with and learned a lot from. Spending time on doing it, all that. Okay, fine. That's my personality. Maybe hashkach on it. The job ended the last day that I was planning to work there. And my whole goal in it had always been from day one just to be able to make a little extra money. And suddenly I had all this new skill, which ended up very shortly thereafter, 2 years later, being a major, major skill to be able to get a hechsher off the ground in a way where it was really a top hechsher we could make on a local scene in a small community, a hechsher that was really, really top quality, well respected, get it off the ground, okay, and it worked. So it's really to me that's a fantastic story of how like we plan one way, we don't realize how the Rosh Hashanah, and this is so the difference between this and the normal stories is the obviousness of it, how obvious this was. Having told you that one, I'm going to tell you another story, which different place. The personality involved is the same one, me. And when I tell stories about kashrus, it's only things that I have firsthand experience with. On the rare occasions that I tell over secondhand stories, I will say something. This is what I know, what I was told. But in this case, it's a firsthand story. I was, in this particular instance, it was a factory that I went to on a regular basis. You would never have heard of this company, even if you did extensive shopping for a homeowner usage. You would never have heard of this company because the products that they made were all wholesale sizes. They were meant for their particular industry. The niche in the industry that this company did was that they dealt with food products, but originally it started with fruit products for the bakery industry and the yogurt and dairy industry, the dairy and bakery industry. So as an example would be when you buy a fruit yogurt, peach yogurt or a strawberry yogurt or a blueberry yogurt, well, the blueberry preserves or whatever they are that go into that yogurt. Okay, so those have to be planned that they're going to go into a yogurt. The dairy that buys it, right, they don't make that. Okay, they buy it from a company that makes a product that they can use. Okay, so that was the niche of this particular company. They were originally into fruits, exclusively. Originally, they've been a fruit packer, as a matter of fact, like a company making like the equivalent of large-scale canned fruit. Then they had moved onward into making these fruits for dairy, which meant yogurts or sour creams, these types of products where you have dairy, not dairy, actually fruit. And they also did it for the bakery industry. You know, like these cakes in which you have fruits on the top of the cake or that type of stuff. So that had been their starting industry. And then with time, they expanded onward as companies are going to do. And they made things like custards and icings and frostings, you know, anything of that nature, anything that would fit the industry that a dairy manufacturer or a bakery would use it. And their customers were usually not the small bakeries, although they certainly sold through distributors. I don't think they sold directly to small bakeries. It was all, you know, but their main customers were factories, you know, bakeries and dairies in the factory. That was their main customer base. So this company, okay, so it was a Heckscher. I would go in there about, I mean, whatever the company, the Heckscher, I was told to go in, you know, fine, would go in, check it around. There was not usually no problems at this particular plant. It wasn't such a difficult Heckscher to take care of, although there was a lot of ingredients there, but the ingredient base rarely changed. Um, the stuff was, you know, I knew what to look for. I knew where to go in, and it was a pretty standard thing. I would go in, go through the place. That was pretty standard. Nothing exciting about it. That tells you nothing about Hashgacha, right? That tells you about Hashgacha. But what's the Hashgacha about Hashgacha? So one day I go in and I'm doing my regular walkthrough, and I stop and I say something here is not kosher in more than one sense of the word. What had caused me to stop? I saw a partial drum. That means a drum that had been opened and not finished of glycerin. The glycerin came from Peru. So let me explain to you what glycerin is. Glycerin is a byproduct. Well, glycerin can be made from various types of fats. There can be kosher glycerin, which can be made from vegetable source or from mineral source. You can have very non-kosher glycerin made from meat sources. Glycerin is a very edible product, a very tasty product. It's not used usually. It has a variety of usages, many usages in products. It can be used, it's used sometimes as a preservative that they don't have to put on the label. It's what they call it allows moisture to the product. It adds sweetener to the product. A lot of very useful items that glycerin can be used for. Now, when you see a partial drum, okay, that's like the old joke about what's worse than finding a worm when you take a bite out of an apple. Don't tell me that. You can smile and tell me finding half a worm, right? That's definitely right. Well, that's exactly what we have here. If I had walked in and I found a drum of non-kosher glycerin that hadn't been opened yet, I would certainly have not left without finding out what is going on here. Why is there a drum of glycerin in the factory? It doesn't belong here. But finding half a drum means that the other half of this drum has gotten used. Okay, so what was going on? The quality control fellow that I spoke to um, pretended, he was a very cooperative guy, and a guy I got along with well. He pretended to be very baffled by it also, which I'm finding a little shocking. I think he was just a very good actor because it's not possible that they could have started running a new product without his knowing about it. Can't be. Okay. The probable answer is that he knew about the product. He didn't even, it had not occurred to him that there was a kashrus issue. It just like slipped him, right? That when I brought it to his attention, he realized immediately that he had goofed in a very serious way, and that he realized that he had no business getting involved in this product without clearing it with the Hechsher. Okay, and the chance now that he realized all that, I suspect he realized all that immediately, but was a good actor, pretended that he didn't know what it was all about, and was very cooperative. He really was cooperative, and I really think that he didn't intend to do anything wrong. I don't think he was trying to hide anything, because had he wanted to hide anything, his easiest way would have been, when he had the half drum left over, to have dumped it, right? And hid the evidence. Okay. Anyway, what had happened was that they got an order from a new customer to provide a donut glaze. Okay. That customer, also kosher supervised, had sent them instructions as to what they wanted in the glaze, what ingredients they wanted in the glaze. Okay. Which included, so it would fit their labels, I would assume, or their product quality, one or the other, or both. And one of the ingredients they wanted in their glaze was glycerin. Now, that itself is not a kashrus issue per se. It's a violation of contract, because they were not allowed to do that without clearing it. Any new raw materials they needed, they had to clear with the hechsher first. So they could have contacted the hechsher and said, "We have this new order. Here are the ingredients we need. Our distributor can get us brand X with a supervision symbol on it. Why? And please send us a in those days it was mostly by fax. Today it would probably be by email. Send us a fax approval on this." And that's what should have done. And I would have gotten also such reference of it. I would have had all the records in front of me when I got there to see that everything was okay. Uh, they blew it. They have this rush order. It's a new customer. They want to get this business from this new customer. They want to get the product out soon. The customer needs the product desperately. They want it like yesterday. They put it on the scheduling immediately, called their distributor with whatever raw materials they needed that they didn't have in stock. And the distributor sent to them whatever glycerin he had in stock. Okay. I walk in, I see the half drum glycerin from Peru, folks. You don't have to ask more than that. Peru is one of the largest meat distributing countries in the world. All of South America, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Peru, all of these countries are massive meat producers and meat distributors. They are the meat suppliers for the whole world. So that if you have glycerin from Peru, that means that this is basically a byproduct of their meat industry, right? And they've got a lot of meat fat around, beef fat around. Could even be tallow. It could have been all sorts of things. It could have been all of them non-kosher, out of which they produced glycerin. So I was indeed correct. The glycerin was not kosher, completely trafe. They had made this donut glaze. I'm guarantee you that you would be able to taste the glycerin in the donut glaze, because glycerin has a nice sweet taste to it, which means that we have a situation of really trafe donuts. Now, they had produced it the day before, 2 days before, 1 or 2 days before. Now I don't remember. By the time I had gotten to the factory, the uh, glaze that they had made, for sending out to the um, new customer, was already on the highway. Okay. It was not nearby. It was a factory in Kentucky it was going to, and this factory was in Baltimore. So we knew that even if it went out a day, it had not gotten to the factory yet in Kentucky. It would take longer than that to get shipped by truck. But it was on the way, and it was labeled kosher, because the company had stamped on it a kosher label. Not good, folks. Not very kosher. Anyway, so my quick visit into this factory, which was usually a few minutes in, a few minutes out, walk through the place, see what's going on, take a good glance around, was absolutely hours, in which by the time I finished, I'd understood exactly all the details of what had happened. I got in touch with both the rabbi of the hechsher I was going into the factory for, the rabbi of who was overseeing it, of the hechsher that the factory that the glaze was going to, and the supervising rabbi, in other words, the mashgiach, or at the other factory that it was being shipped to. All of those I had spoken to by the time I left the place. And we had a figure so that the rabbi on the other end would know he's getting this glaze coming in It may say on the label it's kosher, but it ain't. It's treif. Okay, and that they should work out among themselves whether they take that glaze and destroy it at site when it arrives, whether they ship it back and we gets destroyed on our end, which ended up happening. It got destroyed, got shipped back to our factory, and it got destroyed at our factory. In theory, they could have stripped the label off, but nobody wanted to do that. There was no purpose in it anyway. The simplest way to do it was to destroy the product. They just dumped the whole product. Okay, now, what's the hashgacha about hashgacha over here? Well, one thing is that the company itself didn't even realize they did something wrong. Because if they had wanted to do something wrong, they wanted to hide it, right? They would have just dumped the leftovers, right? It would have been very hard for someone to have traced this problem. It could have been traced, but not likely. In order for it to have been traced, there would have been a few questions people to ask, which they don't necessarily ask. They could have asked. The guy on the glaze end, the rabbi there could have said, where did this product come from? How come I've never seen it before? And you have a letter certifying it. At which case, there might have been a question about it. I might have gotten a call and said, do they make this product? We don't have any list of they're making such a product. And I would say, no, they don't make it. What's the ingredient list on it? And there's glycerin in here. They don't have glycerin in the factory. How did they make this product? I mean, it could have gotten caught, but there's a good chance that it wouldn't have. But I got there and it was there, sitting there waiting. Okay, uh, it was definitely hashgacha about hashgacha, and the result was that we don't know how many people we prevented from ending up eating non-kosher. So it was a good story of hashgacha about hashgacha. Uh, I'll share with you one more of this type, very similar situation, not as seriously dreadful as this one. Different hechsher, different factory, different location, and also you find out all sorts of different products you never think about making. And this particular factory made juice drink bases. In other words, if you have, let's say, an institutional place, it would not be used in a fancy place, but let's say a school or a nursing home, those types of places. Could be a hospital, prison, I guess, in theory, things like that. Some type of institutional food. They made these, what they call number 10 cans, which is a gallon size cans of drink bases. In other words, this was whatever the base of the drink was. It was fruit, some type of fruit, probably lots of sugar, whatever else they put in there, probably some preservative in there, whatever it was, and then canned and then shipped. That was their industry. That was their product line. So the company knew, and the system was such that pretty much all their products were kosher except for their grape drink bases. And it had been set up that there was not a problem with the equipment being used for the grape drink bases. And of course, I went one of my visits through there, and I discovered that on the last order of labels, whoever ordered in the labels had put a kosher symbol on the grape drink. So the grape drink had gone out with a kosher symbol on it. So we took all the labels off their hands. But now the question was, what about the product? So we went to research it, and the company had exceptionally good records, which was one of the big advantages of this company. It was very easy to check records of this company. And we could check exactly when the last products had been made and discover that, lo and behold, there were products that had been made and they had gone out. Okay, so now we've got a serious problem on our hands, it would seem. So now's where our hashgacha about hashgacha goes in. I went to check, right, where the product had been distributed. And this was one of those companies, as companies today do more and more, they don't make product till it's ordered. There's got to be an order before them, and they don't stockpile anything. Okay, everything is ordered in advance. Product is, they have the raw materials in hand. They wait until a salesman could get orders in, and then they make the product and send it out. So if you want an order for the product, you send in an order 3, 4, 5 days in advance, a week in advance, whatever it might be, whatever their timetable is. You send them the order, they get the order in, and then they put it on their scheduling. Okay. We checked out who were the customers. Some of them went directly to places, some went to distributors. But it turned out that every product was going to a area in which there was zero Jewish population, of observant population. Okay, in other words, I remember one area was a nursing home in West Virginia. Now, outside of Charleston, there was no Jewish community in West Virginia at the time, no Orthodox community in West Virginia at the time. And in Charleston, there was no kosher nursing home. And that was just an example. It turned out every customer that had gone out to, right, was a food service operation, a school, a public school, a nursing home, or this or that. We were able to trace out everything. And everything had gone out only to places where there would have been no kashrus concern at all. So it's an interesting hashgacha about hashgacha situation in which, Baruch Hashem, we caught the problem, but there was no tragedy. Okay. Couple of other interesting things. Some more interesting things that happened over the years. This is a fascinating story. It's a long story, a lot of sub-chapters to it. It goes back to our Buffalo days, my Buffalo days, and it goes back to our Vada Kashrus. And the story starts with a gentleman who was a prominent member of the Reformed Jewish community in Buffalo. Very prominent attorney, a lovely, lovely fellow, by the way. Very lovely fellow. And his daughter was getting married. His daughter was marrying a Jewish guy. That's itself, I guess, probably the biggest hashgacha situation or surprise. Now that she's marrying a Jewish guy, she was marrying a guy whose parents kept a kosher home, which was like surprise of surprises. Now, the Lauren, who was the father of the bride, had a lot of from customers. Had some from customers. I don't say a lot. Had some from customers because remember, Buffalo's a small town. A lot of interaction in the Jewish population. And therefore not at all unusual that you'd have people who are in the frum population and the very assimilated, we call it, or reform population that are interacting. But Lauren was convinced that he would have a wedding for his daughter with the best caterer in the city and the top standard of kashrus. And he was convinced that he could pull it off. Okay, now, we had the Vada Kashrus was already in existence by that time. We were quite functional at this time, quite functional. And Lauren, who was a member of the Buffalo Food and Beverage Club, was certainly a person to know where the best food and beverage in the Buffalo area was. And he said the best caterer in Buffalo is the Hyatt Regency. So he's going to arrange, we're going to try to see if we can arrange that the Hyatt Regency should have a strictly kosher wedding under the Vada Kashrus Hechsher. Okay. This wedding was incredibly planned. Okay. This was not a Corona wedding where you have 20 people and you plan, 2 days before the wedding, you figure out where am I going to have a place to have this wedding. This wedding was planned for the wedding itself. The wedding banquet was in Lauren's backyard, which was about the size of my neighborhood. He had a mammoth backyard, okay, with several large tents assembled in the yard, just for shade. It was like that was the way the wedding itself was planned to be. We had this meeting. The meeting was myself, somebody else from Vada Kashrus, Lauren's daughter, the bride, his wife, the mother of the bride, the head of catering of the Hyatt Regency, and the executive chef of the Hyatt Regency. Hyatt Regency in Buffalo has never done kosher catering before. The head of catering and the executive chef, both of them not Jewish people, know all about kosher catering. The Hyatt Regency often circulated people among the different hotels, different cities. So one of them had previously been in Pittsburgh, and the other one had previously been in Nashville. And in both cities, the local Hyatt did kosher catering. And they both had experience with kosher catering and with good people who knew how to do things properly. So not only did you have this, you have to get to see it in good case, right? Talk about how, the two people that we have to deal with at High, both are lovely people to deal with. Both of them knew basically everything we needed to know that they should know about what to do. We sat down, and the bride, who had never never eaten kosher in her life, okay, never had anything kosher, never had a kosher steak in her life, okay, she was willing to go along with her father's strange antics of wanting a kosher wedding as long as the wedding didn't look too kosher. That was her contingency. It could be kosher, it didn't, as long as it didn't look kosher. Now, me, having eaten kosher my whole life, hadn't the slightest idea what it means that something should look kosher. It turned out to her, looking kosher meant no brisket, no rib. Okay, those are kosher cuts. None of those you can serve. Those are out. Uh, Kip, who was the executive chef, I even remember his last name still after all these years, right? Kip said, no problem. And he suggests something. To me, it means nothing. I have no idea what he just said, what he was suggesting. And it turns out it was made from eye of veal, and it was made to look like it was I hate to tell this for people who are eating kosher these days, it was meant to look like a pork roast or a pork chop. That's how it was, but it came from veal. So it certainly didn't look kosher, right? And it could be strictly kosher, okay? But that was going to be the main course, okay? Of course, our butchers at this point, we already had butchers under Hashgacha, but this was much more quantity of veal than they would ever been equipped to handle. We had to get a special order of veal in from someplace just for this event, okay? And we had the executive chef broke down his entire menu. He understood what we were looking for, basically. He broke down every item he was going to prepare on this menu. He sat down, drew up the menu there with the family members, and drew up the menu and then broke down each of the items into all the raw ingredients that were going to be in that product, and then supplied me with a full list of everything that he would need that would be kosher. And we went through the list and see, what they have, what are they using, what do we need to replace it with a different product that meets our standard. And it was very doable. It was very doable. It took a lot of time, but it was doable. Here, we had some really interesting curiosities happened on it. There were some fantastically interesting angles on the story that happened here. I'll just share with you a few of them. One of them was the wines. So Lauren and wife were experts at wines. They went to New York, the two of them. I don't know if they were there anyway or they went special for this purpose. They sat down with a liquor store that specializes in quality kosher wines. I remember this was a time when quality kosher wines were not nearly as available as they are today. They were just beginning to become available, and many of them had questionable kosher standards. They sat down and they went through a whole bunch of wines, and they had a list of wines that they were interested in. This was for the toast after the fish, and this is for the toast after the bake, and this is for the reception, right? And they had a whole list of it. And of course, the main course, this veal that they were preparing, needed some type of wine to cook it with. So they had, that was also part of it. We had a whole bunch of wines that we were now going through. We had to check through them. Some of them, the Hechsher was problematic. And we could not, we told them that we can't use this particular, maybe, we wasn't doing, explain to them. Well, the Hyatt people had no problem with understanding it. And Lauren was very understanding. And whatever you want, Rabbi, that's what we're doing. Uh, the other intriguing thing that was that many of the wines that they wanted for the toasts were not mavushal. Okay, they were not cooked. They were not pasteurized wines. I mean, quality wines are not always pasteurized. Now, which means that if you can't have your waiters going around, the Hyatt Regency's waiters going around and serving, the wine to people. That's going to be create a kashrus problem. Well, what could we do? We had a lot of options what to do, but we decided that the best choice here under the situation, remember, is we're breaking new ground here. Nobody in Buffalo has ever seen an event like this kosher, right? The Hyatt Regency is, for the first time in its history, the local Hyatt Regency is going to be making a kosher event. Okay, we want everything to go as smoothly as possible, right? To show people that this can be done, right? There's no excuse to say, well, I want to use the top caterer in town and therefore the event has to be not kosher. That was exactly what of our goals were. Okay, so what do you do with the wines that they're going to be serving? So we brought in a crew of wine pourers. Okay, and we sat down with the Hyatt Regency and we discussed with them. Okay, so how do our wine pourers dress? So this is the policy. Okay, they have to wear the same uniform that the Hyatt Regency wine waiters and waitresses wear, which was white shirt. Let me see, was it white shirt? Yeah, white shirt and black pants or skirt. Pants or skirt were both fine, but these were black. Most of them were pants, but they said it was okay if our wine pourers were female and wore black skirts and white shirts. That was the uniform. Okay, so then we had to go hunt around Buffalo to have adequate number of people to be able to do this job. We did. We found enough. But in so doing, we had one or two women who usually only wore kerchiefs, didn't wear shaitels. Now the question was, this was a real serious halachic question, right? Was it acceptable to have the wine pourers who are being dressed as waiters and waitresses of the Hyatt Regency, right, to have hair coverings? So that Shaila had to get posted, not by me, and not by Kip, the executive chef, but by the head of catering at the Hyatt Regency. She had to poskin that Shaila. And her psak was, kerchiefs are in. So if the shirt is white and the skirt or pants are black, the kerchief has to be black because it has to be black, white, black. Then it fits a very nice thing. And it's perfectly fine for them with black kerchiefs. So we had wine pourers. Some of our wine pourers had black kerchiefs on. Okay, and that was part of the uniform, right? That they wore. So we got the wine. There were some funny stories happened at this whole event. Like the meat got shipped to the wrong location because the place from which we ordered the veal didn't have the Hyatt Regency on as a location for theirs, so it got shipped to a summer camp an hour and a half out of Buffalo, which was a Jewish kosher summer camp that I didn't even know existed. Right, it was for kids from the Midwest, and so the Hyatt Regency executive chef himself, Kip, got into his own car, drove down there, and picked up the veal and brought it back. It was, numerous other funny stories happened there. I'll share with you one more that happened. The bride and the groom were living in Toronto, which is only a 2-hour drive from Buffalo at the time. The bride, who herself was Jewish by birth, and the most kosher thing happened in her life probably was that her wedding was kosher. But she had a very close girlfriend in Toronto who assembled wedding cakes as a hobby. Okay, those big top layer wedding cakes, you've all seen them. Okay, those are incredible things to assemble. Now, the friend is not Jewish. Okay, and now she had promised her friend from when she first got engaged that her friend would make the wedding cake for her. Okay, so we've gotten this far, folks, right? Can we get this wedding cake, right, kosher? Okay, so here's what we did, folks. Okay, the cake was baked. The parts of the cake were baked. Okay, by the friend in a kosher kitchen under supervision of the COR in Toronto. okay? Then sealed, closed, and stamped across, sealed, closed by the mashgiach of the bakery there in Toronto, okay? Shipped down, brought down to Buffalo, and now they're going to be assembled in Buffalo. Okay, now the wedding is a Sunday afternoon, and you apparently, I didn't know this at the time, you don't assemble a wedding cake on the day that it's served, you assemble it the day before. At least that's what she felt strongly. You have to assemble it and ice it the day before. Okay. Well, the day before is Shabbos, but she's the one who wants to do it, and she'll assemble it anywhere we want in Buffalo, right? And it's her choice, right? She can do it anywhere she wants to. So she actually, we did the following for her. We had her assemble the cake. A member, the board member of the Vada Kashrus in their house. Everything was brought before Shabbos. The board member of the Vad was our mashgiach at checking all the raw materials as they came in. And on Shabbos, she was assembling the cake. It was her choice. Nothing wrong with that, you know. At in on Shabbos, you know. So, but it goes on. The bottom line is, it all got pulled off. Okay, the wine got pulled off, the meat got pulled off, the catering got pulled off. Everything went fine. I have absolutely no idea if this couple is still married. Not the slightest idea. I do know that the dinner was fully kosher. It was very, very kosher. The dinner, everything was fine at the dinner. Everything went fine. But there were a lot of interesting side benefits that happened too. We get to our Hashgacha about Hashgacha, our side benefits on this. Number one, to this day, the story goes back 35 years. The Hyatt Regency still has in Buffalo kosher catering. It's one of the main kosher caterers in the Buffalo area. Okay. At that time, they only had Fleischik, obviously. They didn't even, they have Milchik and Fleischik catering. Okay. And they do catering for that whole area. They're one of the largest caterers in that area. Now, kosher, they have a kosher catering set up there. Number one. Okay. Number two, Lauren, who was a lawyer by training, and I ended up drawing up the bylaws for the Buffalo Vada Kashrus. Okay. Lauren is a lawyer. I'm the rabbi. And there were certain specifications that I wanted in the bylaws. Okay. They were as follows. I wanted that the lay board of the Vada Kashrus should have no say in choosing a future rabbinic administrator, the person who would be running the Vada Kashrus. My reasoning was very simple. You have no control over who's going to be on a board of an organization like that in the future. And you have no idea who's going to be in charge, who they're going to hire. And I had invested a lot of time in getting a top kosher standard, right? I wanted it to be maintained. The bylaws said, and they say to this day, that the rabbinic administrator of the Vada Kashrus, whoever it is, chooses his successor. Okay, it's gone through 6 transitions since that time. Okay, now it's become accepted that the rabbi of the Young Israel of Buffalo is the head of the Vada Kashrus. It's been that way for almost since, virtually since. So the head of the Vada Kashrus and the head of the Young Israel are the same person. Okay, and the standards of the Vada Kashrus have not only been maintained, they've gotten much stronger because situations that we had to deal with because we had no choice, we now have better situations. So we now have this exceptionally good Vada Kashrus, guaranteed that the standards will be tight because of a Reform Jew who drew up the bylaws, okay, who was a member of the board and a pro bono lawyer for the Vada Kashrus because he decided he wanted his daughter to have a kosher wedding because he had friends who were Orthodox, okay, and he was so happy with the results of the wedding that he was very willing to donate his time, a lot of time involved, right, to get the bylaws done, okay, so somewhere he's getting rewarded for being very involved in kosher or getting kosher off the ground, right, in Buffalo and still existent. Okay. Anyway, those are some fascinating stories that I have from my own experience of Hashgacha about Hashgacha. The Rebbe Shalom runs the world, right? Sometimes we see it obviously, and sometimes we see it less obviously. Some of these stories I've told you are so obvious, as, you know, there's no way to interpret them any other way. But that, you know, like that there's such a obvious hashgacha. In this last story, that it happened to have been that the head of catering and the executive chef, both not Jewish, at the Hyatt Regency, both knew all about kosher and knew exactly what we needed, right? Just as a small tidbit of the story, right, of what happened. Anyway, next week, Mitzvah Hashem, keep track of time. I know that my clock has changed already. Some of you are in parts of the world where I think they changed the clock. It's coming Saturday night. I'm not sure where they're doing. I think North America, they changed the clock either this coming Saturday night or the week after. But whatever it is, figure out what time this year is. It will be 8:15 at our time. I haven't fully decided yet. I'm very inclined to next week talk about my own take on what God's telling us about the coronavirus. Okay. Okay. There's a lot of enthusiasm. Those people whose pictures seem to like that idea. Okay. I'm very tempted to meet that topic for next week. Okay. Everyone, have a great week. Okay. Keep safe and keep healthy.